Picture a plain of red sand that stretches to the horizon in every direction, so flat and so wide that the sky feels closer than the next ridge of dunes. The air above the ground shimmers and bends. A dry wind moves over stone that has been hot since sunrise, and by mid-afternoon, the surface would blister an unprotected hand. The thermometer, if anyone thought to bring one, would climb past 45 degrees Celsius. There has been no rain here for months. The nearest reliable waterhole may lie 100 kilometers to the east, hidden behind a low range of hills the color of rust. Almost every visitor who has ever tried to cross this country without guidance has left bones behind. And yet, walking calmly through this same landscape at an easy pace, without maps or compasses, without wells or roads, without stored water in bottles, are people who not only survive here, but have called this desert home for a length of time so vast it almost defies the mind. How is it possible? That is the question this story tries to answer. The people we are speaking about are the Aboriginal peoples of Australia. They are not a single nation, but hundreds of nations, each with its own language, its own country, its own laws, and its own sacred stories. The countries at the heart of this account lie in the great arid interior of the continent, in the deserts and the bush of central and western Australia. This is the driest inhabited landmass on Earth, and much of it is desert in the strictest sense. Yet human beings have lived here continuously for at least 60,000 years, and probably longer. That figure is worth pausing over. 60,000 years is not a slogan, it is deep time. It stretches back beyond the last ice age, beyond the extinction of the great ice age animals, beyond the settlement of Europe by modern humans, beyond almost every event in the story most of the world is used to hearing. During all those millennia, the ancestors of today's Aboriginal peoples watched coastlines rise and fall, watched inland seas dry into salt pans, watched rivers change their course, and adjusted their way of life to each new turning of the land. Their culture is the oldest continuous living culture on the planet. It is still living. That is the first thing to understand, and everything that follows rests on it. Now consider the environment that shaped and was shaped by these peoples. The center of Australia is a place of extremes. In summer, the sun hammers the ground until the sand itself feels metallic. Shade temperatures climb past 40 and often past 45. Ground surface temperatures can approach 70. Winds pick up fine dust and carry it in reddish sheets that stain the horizon. In winter, the nights can drop close to freezing, so that the same body which sweated all day must warm itself against a bitter cold by darkness. Rainfall is not only sparse, but wildly unpredictable. In some regions, the annual average is less than 200 millimeters, and in a bad year, even that trickle fails. Great rivers appear on old maps, but almost none of them actually flow above ground for most of the year. They lie hidden as ribbons of dry sand between banks of she-oak and river redgum, waiting for a rare storm to bring them briefly to life. Beyond the rivers stretch spinifex plains, mulga scrub, gibber deserts of dark polished stones, and rolling red dunes. This is the bush and the desert together, harsh, spare, and yet, to those who read it correctly, full of provision. Water was and remains the first and greatest question. Without water, no strategy for hunting, no knowledge of plants, no map of stars can save a person for more than a few days in that heat. The Aboriginal peoples of the desert responded to this problem not with a single tool, but with an entire way of knowing the land. Their minds carried an internal atlas of water, more detailed than any modern survey. They knew where the permanent rockholes lay, tucked into the folds of ranges, sometimes covered with a slab of stone to keep the water cool and to prevent birds from fouling it. They knew where soaks lay beneath sandy creek beds, invisible from the surface, revealed only by the faint darkening of sand or the pattern of certain small plants above them. To reach these soaks, a person would dig with a wooden kuleman or with bare hands, sometimes down through a meter or more of dry sand, until damp grains appeared, and then a slow gathering of clear water in the bottom of the pit. There were also gifts of water in living things. Certain frogs, sometimes called water-holding frogs, bury themselves deep in the clay when the rains stop, holding a body full of water inside a cocoon of shed skin, waiting for the next storm, which may come only after several years. A person with the right knowledge could recognize the faint depressions in the surface that marked their hiding places, dig them out with care, and press them gently to release a mouthful of clean water before returning them to the ground. Certain roots of desert trees held water in fibrous canals and could be cut, upended into a kulemon, and drained slowly. The bark of some species could be tapped for a bitter but drinkable liquid. Morning dew was collected from grass and leaves in the cool hours before the sun climbed high. Even the whitish sap of certain plants was a resource when nothing else remained. None of this was accidental. Every waterhole across a territory the size of a European country was known by name, by story, by owner, and by the songs that carried its location from one generation to the next. The routes between waterholes were memorized as sequences, so that a traveler could set off across country that looked, to an outsider, entirely featureless, and know that at a certain landmark the next spring would appear, and beyond it a soak, and beyond that a rockhole in the shadow of a particular hill. It was a system of survival built not on stored supplies, but on knowledge held in the mind and body of the walker. When Europeans first crossed this same country, they died of thirst within sight of water they could not see. The Aboriginal traveler did not die because the landscape was not silent for them. It spoke. To gather food in such a land requires patience and precision. Big game exists here, though it is spread thin. The kangaroo, the emu, the goanna, and other large monitor lizards, wallabies in the rocky country, and various birds all become the target of skilled hunters. The primary weapon in the open desert was the spear, but not the spear alone. Alongside it went a piece of technology so elegant and so well suited to its purpose that it deserves its own place in any account of human ingenuity. This is the woomera, the spear thrower. To look at it is to see a simple length of hardwood, curved slightly, with a small hook of stone or wood at one end, and often a hollowed shape in the middle. Yet in the hand of an experienced hunter, that piece of wood effectively lengthens the arm, adding leverage to the throw and hurling a spear with a force and range no unaided arm can match. A well-thrown spear from a woomera could kill a kangaroo at 40 or 50 paces. The woomera also served as a scoop, a small dish, and a friction stick for fire-making. Few tools in the human record combined so many functions in so light and portable a form. Then there is the boomerang, a word borrowed into English from Aboriginal languages and often misunderstood. The famous returning boomerang, curved and light, does indeed spin back to the thrower and was used for training the eye and hand, for hunting small birds, and for signaling. But the workhorse weapon of the hunt was the non-returning boomerang, heavier, longer, more like a curved throwing stick, which flew straight and hard, and could bring down a kangaroo, an emu, or a bustard with a well-placed hit to the legs or neck. Non-returning boomerangs also served as clubs in close combat, as digging tools, as fire tenders, and as musical instruments when tapped in pairs to accompany song. Different regions favored different shapes, and a skilled maker could work a hardwood blank with fire and a stone adze until it had exactly the aerodynamic curve the local hunters preferred. The greatest of the hunter's tools, however, is not carried in the hand, but lives in the eye. Aboriginal trackers are, by wide agreement, among the finest in the world. They read the ground the way a scholar reads a page. A curved line in the sand tells them not only that a lizard passed here, but which species it was, in which direction it was moving, how fast, whether it was hungry or wary, and how long ago it went by. The subtle displacement of a single stone can betray the passage of a heavy animal hours earlier. The faint scuff where a foot rolled outward tells of a limp, and a limp tells of a wound, and a wound tells of a hunt worth pursuing. Even the slight browning of a broken grass stem can mark time down to the hour. A tracker following a wounded kangaroo across country might travel for a full day at a walking pace, never losing the trail, adjusting course whenever the tired animal turned, until at last the pursuit ended with a final spear. That skill also served in less lethal ways. It allowed people who had become separated from their group to be found. It told visitors from a neighboring country apart from strangers. It read the recent history of the land as a kind of ongoing document, and it kept the memory of all who had passed through, human and animal alike. Tracking is a way of respecting the country as much as it is a way of eating from it. The food gathered by hunting was only part of the diet, and often not the largest part. In the desert, day-to-day nourishment came from what is generally called bush tucker, the wide inventory of native foods known to those who live from the land. Seeds gathered from certain grasses and wattles were winnowed on a kulamon, and then ground on a flat sandstone with a smaller stone held in the hand, producing a coarse flour that could be moistened with water and baked in ashes to make a simple bread. Native tubers and roots were dug from certain patches of ground that the gatherers knew intimately, some of them located by the pattern of vines above the surface, some by the memory of last year's harvest. Wild figs, quandongs, bush plums, native oranges, and a scattering of small berries provided sweetness in season. Certain flowers were soaked in a kulamon of water to make a mild, sugary drink. Wild honey was located by watching the flight of small native bees back to their hidden hives, and then following that flight patiently through the scrub. Among the most remarkable foods of the desert is the witchetty grub, the pale, thick larva of a certain moth that lives inside the roots of the witchetty bush. A gatherer who knows the plant strikes the ground near the base and listens, or reads the state of the leaves and the small ridges of earth, and then digs down, prizing the grub from its wooden home. Eaten raw, the flesh is soft, buttery, tasting a little like almond, and packed with fat and protein. Lightly roasted in warm ashes, it becomes crisp on the outside and richer still. A handful of these grubs can sustain a person through a long day of travel. Small honey ants were also dug from their deep nests, their swollen abdomens containing a golden reserve of nectar that dissolves on the tongue like syrup. Cycad seeds, though poisonous in their raw form, were treated by a careful process of soaking, roasting, and pounding until they were safe to eat, a knowledge encoded in tradition and passed on with care. The work of provision was shared between women and men according to long-standing patterns. Men took the leading role in the large game hunt, especially of kangaroo and emu, tracking for hours or days and closing in with spear and woomera. Women more often gathered seeds, dug tubers, collected witchetty grubs and honey ants, and hunted smaller reptiles like sand goannas, which they killed with a digging stick. In practical terms, the food brought back by the women's gathering was often more reliable and more abundant than the food brought back from the hunt, and both were treated as vital. A day of travel might yield seeds, tubers, berries, 1 or 2 lizards, a handful of grubs, and, once every few days, the heavier prize of a kangaroo or emu. This balance kept the group fed even when the hunt failed, and it drew on nearly every ecological niche the country had to offer. Behind all of this stood the mastery of fire. Fire was made by friction. A short stick of hardwood was spun rapidly between the palms, with its tip pressed into a groove cut in a softer, flat piece of wood, until fine dust darkened, then smoked, then glowed into a coal that could be nursed into flame with dry grass. This method sounds simple, but demands strength, technique, and dry material, and skilled firemakers could produce a coal in less than a minute. Once made, fire was often carried between camps as a slow-burning stick of ironwood, a smoldering ember hidden in a tuft of bark, so that new camps did not have to begin the whole process again. But fire in Aboriginal Australia was more than a domestic convenience. It was a tool for shaping the land itself. Over tens of thousands of years, the people of the desert and the bush practiced what has come to be called fire stick farming, the careful and deliberate use of small, cool burns across the country in a mosaic pattern. Certain patches of grassland were fired in the cooler seasons, before the wind and heat could turn them uncontrollable, to clear old rank grass, to encourage the fresh green growth that would draw kangaroos and other grazers into predictable places, and to prevent the buildup of dry fuel that would otherwise, in a lightning strike, become a catastrophic wildfire. The result of this patient work, repeated across countless generations, was a landscape sculpted by human hands as surely as any garden, though far larger than any garden. Early European travelers, without understanding what they were seeing, described open park-like country with clear grass beneath widely spaced trees, and were astonished to find that this apparent paradise was not natural in the modern sense, but the fruit of skilled indigenous management. When that management was interrupted, the land began to change. Fuel loads grew, and fires became larger and more destructive. What had been a mosaic became a tinderbox. The people who managed the country in this way were, by necessity, mobile. No single spot in the desert could feed and water a group for very long. Life was structured around movement, a slow and knowing circulation between water sources, food grounds, and ceremony places, across territories that could stretch across tens of thousands of square kilometers. A group might spend a few days at one soak, taking what the surrounding country offered without exhausting it, then move on, returning to the same soak weeks or months later when the plants had recovered and the animals had returned. This rhythm was not wandering. It was a highly refined form of land management, woven into the rhythm of the seasons and into the memory of previous years. Elders held in their minds a knowledge of what had bloomed and what had failed decade after decade, and could adjust plans accordingly. The territory of one group met the territory of the next at recognized borders, and crossings were made with permission, ceremony, and reciprocity. There was no wilderness in the European sense. Every acre was known, named, and cared for. The great question, of course, is how anyone could carry such a vast body of knowledge without writing. The answer lies in one of the most remarkable intellectual traditions ever developed by human beings. It is called by many names in many languages. In English, it is often referred to as the dreaming or dream time, though these words are only approximations. In one central desert language, it is called chukurpa, and in others by other terms, all of which point to something larger than the English word suggests. The dreaming is not simply a set of myths. It is a way of understanding the world in which the ancestral beings who shaped the land during a foundational time are also present now, in the land itself, in its features, in its living creatures, and in the law that governs how humans should live. Certain hills are the resting bodies of ancestral beings. Certain gorges are where they fought or where they wept. Certain waterholes came into being because a certain being paused there. The land is not a background to human life. It is family, and it is a text. Across this text run what English speakers call songlines. A songline is exactly what its name suggests, a line traced across the land whose sequence of features is remembered by a song. The song moves in order from place to place. Each verse carries the name of a feature, its story, its associated animal or plant, its water status, its dangers, its permissible foods, and its relationship to other places. A person who has learned a songline knows how to walk from one waterhole to the next across hundreds of kilometers, because the song tells them what comes next and what to look for as they walk. Songlines are simultaneously map, history, ecology, and law. They cross language boundaries so that a traveler can follow a line into the territory of neighboring peoples who sing the same story in their own tongue and be understood and be welcomed at the waters that the song describes. It is thought that some songlines run for thousands of kilometers, from the coast into the deep interior, and that between them they weave a continent-sized memory system without a single written page. Consider what this means for navigation. Without a compass, without a map, without a written record, a person can cross deserts that have killed better-equipped strangers because the country itself is memorized as music. The stars above complement this system, marking direction and season, and the great figures traced across the night sky are read into the same stories that walk along the ground. The land above and the land below speak with one voice. To travel is to sing. To sing is to remember. The physical tools that accompany this way of life were and are few, light, and deeply thought out. The spear and the woomera we have already met, the boomerang in its different forms as well. To this were added the digging stick, a hardened length of wood sharpened at one end and used to prise tubers, dig soaks, break open termite mounds, and defend against snakes. Stone tools, chipped from suitable rocks with a percussion technique refined over unimaginable time, served as knives, scrapers, adzes, and points. Certain flint-like stones were valued and traded across enormous distances, moving from a single quarry through many hands and many generations, sometimes ending up thousands of kilometers from where they were struck. Grinding stones for seed processing were sometimes so large and heavy that they were left at seasonal camps rather than carried, and were counted as the property of the group that used them. And then there is the kulamon. This is a shallow, curved dish of wood, sometimes hollowed from a single piece by cutting and slow burning, sometimes shaped from bark, and it is one of the most versatile objects in the whole inventory of the desert people. It carries water from a soak back to the camp. It carries seeds during winnowing. It holds ground flour, meat, honey, or berries. It scoops sand out of a hole while digging for water. It shields a coal from the wind while a fire is being coaxed to life. Every household possessed at least one. To watch a person walking with a kulamon full of clear water balanced on the head across a long stretch of open country is to see an unbroken thread that stretches back into the deep past. Clothing was minimal and appropriate to the climate. In much of the desert, people wore very little through the hot months, sometimes only a belt of hairstring with small ornaments, sometimes cloaks of skin or fiber in the cooler seasons, particularly at night when the winter cold could bite. Ornaments of shell, bone, and stone marked responsibility, status, and belonging. Body paint made from ochres in red, yellow, and white, mixed with animal fat or plant juice, served ceremonial purposes, and also had practical benefits against sun and biting insects. The famous rock art of the continent, painted and engraved on shelter walls and open stone in countless sites, includes some of the oldest continuously used image-making traditions in the human record. Some sites have been visited and refreshed by successive generations for tens of thousands of years without a break. Behind the tools, behind the songlines, behind the practical daily work of finding water and food, there was and is a spiritual life so deeply woven into everything else that it cannot really be separated from them. The land is not a resource, it is a living relative. Certain places are sacred, and their sacredness is not a metaphor. They are treated with a specific etiquette of approach, of speech, of silence, of ceremony. Some places belong to certain groups and to certain custodians, whose responsibility it is to look after them, to sing the songs that belong there, to conduct the rituals that keep the country in balance. Other places may be visited only under particular circumstances. Some knowledge is open to all, and some is restricted to those who have taken the necessary steps to receive it. Speaking respectfully of this world requires acknowledging that not everything is meant to be told to outsiders. There are stories that belong to the country and to the people who hold them, and it is not the outside listener's place to demand them. What can be said, with respect, is that the whole way of life described here rests on a single foundational conviction. The land is alive. It thinks, in a manner of speaking. It remembers. It has law. Human beings are not owners of the land, but members of a much larger community that includes rocks, water, plants, animals, weather, and ancestors. To take from the country is to enter a relationship with it, and the relationship carries obligations. Certain foods must be taken only at certain times. Certain species must not be hunted by certain groups because those species are their kin, their totem, their share of the family of things. Waters must be approached with the correct greeting. Places where an ancestor lies must be given their due. This is not superstition in the caricatured sense. It is a working ethical system that has kept the land productive for a length of time no other human tradition can match. It is also a science in its own idiom. The knowledge held by senior women and men about ecology, weather, hydrology, plant behavior, animal cycles, and geology is extraordinarily detailed, and much of it has been confirmed by modern research that came to the same conclusions many decades later. When ranger programs today combine indigenous burning practice with satellite monitoring, they achieve results in fire management that neither system produces alone. When ecologists work with senior custodians, they learn which plants indicated which soaks, which season followed which flower, which animal responded to which star. The scientific value of this heritage is only beginning to be understood by outsiders, though its holders have never doubted it. All of this was carried and continues to be carried in country that has tested every human strength. There were times when droughts ran so long that even the deepest soaks failed, and groups had to shift entire ranges, negotiating with distant neighbors whose lands still held water. There were times when great storms brought sudden floods that transformed dry rivers into torrents overnight and reshaped the map of soaks and channels, so that the songlines had to be revisited and, in a sense, reheard against a new arrangement of ground. Through all of this, the people adapted, remembered, and continued. Then, in the space of a few centuries, came a change greater than any drought. From the late 1700s onwards, the arrival of British colonization began to transform the continent in ways that were often violent and always disruptive. Lands were taken, waterholes were seized for stock, diseases against which Aboriginal peoples had no inherited resistance swept through communities. Massacres, disproportionate policing, forced removals, and the outright banning of language and ceremony in many regions inflicted wounds whose effects are still being felt today. The scale and nature of this history is a subject in itself, and it deserves honesty rather than silence. The desert peoples were among those who were pushed to the margins of their own country, moved off traditional lands, gathered into missions and reserves far from the waters and songs that had shaped them, forbidden in many places to speak their languages or to practice the ceremonies that had held their world together. And yet, and this is the note on which any honest telling of the story must end, they did not disappear. They are still here. Aboriginal peoples in the deserts of Central and Western Australia, and in every other part of the continent, continue to live, to speak their languages, to sing their songs, to walk their country, to teach their traditions, and to fight, in courts and in political forums and in the daily work of family and community, for the recognition of their rights and the return of their lands. Ranger programs led by Indigenous custodians care for enormous areas of country using both traditional fire management and modern conservation techniques. Artists working in remote communities have produced some of the most important bodies of contemporary painting in the world, translating songlines and dreaming stories into images that speak to audiences across continents. Elders continue to hold and pass on knowledge that no library on Earth could contain in full. Native title claims have restored, in various forms, the recognized connection between many communities and the lands their ancestors have never really left. The songs that mapped the desert still map it, though the world around them has changed beyond recognition. Return then to the opening image, the red plain, the trembling air, the sky pressing down. In that landscape, a person walks, unhurried, holding a kulamon and a spear, carrying nothing else but the memory of 100 water holes, the songs that link them, the shape of the country in every direction, and the presence of a tradition older than the pyramids by tens of thousands of years. That person is not lost. That person is at home. And when we ask how it is possible to live in a place that seems, to the untrained eye, to offer nothing but heat and distance, the answer is that the country was never empty of gifts. It was and remains full of them for those who know how to read it. The knowledge that made this possible is not a museum piece. It belongs to living peoples who have carried it across an almost unimaginable span of time, through fire and drought and colonization, and who carry it still. 60,000 years is not a chapter that has closed. It is a chapter that continues, sentence by sentence, breath by breath, on the same red ground beneath the same wide sky.